Well, yesterday I left off talking about finishing the things that we start. And I don't mean to pick on you. Some of you are probably getting elbowed by your wife right now because of my comments yesterday. But I want to simply continue on that thought, because what Paul says in the next verse is, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks. Now, this idea of always being prepared, most people don't prepare. They put things off until the last minute, and then they get it all in a hurry, and they stressfully push through until they're done. When I was in college, that was really my default. I would not really take my assignments seriously until the last week, and then I would stay up all night. In fact, I used to use various uppers to help me stay awake, and I would just push through day and night, 24 hours a day, until I finished the term, and then I would just collapse. And that became my whole pattern. Delay, 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 and then go crazy trying to finish what I had a deadline on. And that's really just kind of a torturous way to live. You can do it more easily when you're young, but as you get older, it really begins to take a toll on you. And so I figured out a long time ago that I need to always be preparing myself in little pieces at a time. And so when I talked yesterday about reading the Bible, the idea is that we read a few chapters a day, 4 or 5 at the most. If you read 4 or 5 chapters in the Bible every day, you can read the entire Bible in a year. I tend to read more than that, but then again, I have the time available. And as I explained to one of my guys, I said, this is what I do for a living, so it's really kind of an advantage that I have. But nonetheless, I think the principle still applies, that we always need to be in the preparation of, how does God want me to live my life as a follower of Jesus Christ? And the best way to do that is to be in the Word every day. And I know that some days come up, things develop, and that path gets interrupted. But nonetheless, it can become a bad habit sometimes where we stop reading the Scriptures, we get engaged in all sorts of other things, and those other things begin to take over our life. For me, the easiest thing, the most effective thing for me is to start my day in the Word, because that way I don't put it off and miss out on it altogether. Have you ever had that experience where I'm going to read my Bible, but I'll do it later, and later never gets here because then you're getting ready for bed, you're tired, and you can't stay awake because you're trying to read your Bible, so you just go to bed. And that begins a cycle. And so you say, well, I just don't have time to read the Word. Well, you have to make time for things that matter. And you see, again, I use the illustration of cutting the lawn because it's summertime, and I don't enjoy it. I mean, let me just be honest. I do not enjoy yard work. It's a task that I have to do, not only to keep my wife happy, but keep my self-respect up a little bit too. But the whole point is that it's something that you just have to plan for. You have to organize around. You have to focus on. And I have found oftentimes that even like, say, something as simple as my mower, if I put my tools away with the gas tanks filled and the oil checked and everything ready to go, then I'm more efficient than I am if I get up later and then I have to do all those things afterwards in order to catch up with the work. It's just one of those kind of simple things. And I know probably isn't the greatest illustration for you, and you probably are sitting there feeling, wah, 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 wah. Okay, I get it. But here's the bottom line. There are things in your life that are necessary things. And you need to make sure that you're preparing yourself for those necessary things instead of giving unnecessary attention to unnecessary things. In fact, we can even be guilty of giving unnecessary attention to necessary things. It might surprise you, but I have a kind of personality that can kind of obsess on certain things. I mean, I get interested in something and then I begin to focus on it and begin to spend all of my time doing it. In fact, quite honestly, one of the things I find in reading and studying and researching the Scriptures is that I love it, and I can do it to the neglect of my wife and other necessary things in my life. Now, if I'm going to be effective as a Bible teacher, then it's necessary for me to know what the Bible says and to have thought long and deeply about what it is that God is saying to me that I can share with other people. That's just a reality of what I do. But on the other hand, you have to understand that I have to realize that sometimes I have other necessary things, like I have a wife and other responsibilities that I have to give attention to. Those are necessary things. And so what happens is my Bible study is necessary, but I can give believe it or not, an unnecessary amount of attention. How do I measure that's unnecessary? Because it's causing me to neglect other things that are important. There's another dynamic that many of us wrestle with when it comes to the issue of time. It's the fact that we live with what's called the tyranny of the urgent. In other words, when you neglect certain things like the basic maintenance of your life, then what you find is that suddenly those things break down and you have to put all of your energy into trying to fix those things. You know, there's one industrialist from the 20th century, very famous gentleman, and he was very interesting. My dad had the opportunity to meet him once, and he just simply told me, my dad said when he went into his office delivering some plans from the military at the time during World War II, that the man was sitting there, he had holes in his shoes, and he had using his tie for a belt, and it looked like he hadn't shaved in days, and he was pretty disheveled. I mean, this guy was a multimillionaire when there weren't many of those in the day. And here he is, he delivers these plans and then walks out. And my dad said, wow, that's really crazy. But this guy had an amazing saying. He used to say that he'd get this pile of stuff on his desk so he couldn't even get through it. So he'd take it all, he'd shove it into a lower drawer, one of the drawers in his desk, close them. And somebody said, well, what if something's important in there? And he says, everything that's important will come out of there screaming on its own. I mean, that certainly is one way of dealing with life. But you see, it's that view that says, I'm only going to deal with things when they become a tyrant that demands my total attention. And that's why, as Christians, what we want to do is live kind of a well-ordered and organized life, that we really want to try to develop certain disciplines and for certain systems. And for me, I found that that's brought a lot of stability and sanity into my life, that, you know, even when you talk about paying your taxes, my wife and I, actually, believe it or not, more my wife than I, but we start really kind of preparing to pay our taxes every April as soon as we finished paying our taxes the previous April. And you may say that's so arduous and time consuming, but it's really helpful because suddenly you have a budget that you're living under. You know where your money's going. You know what you can afford and what you can't afford. And you make those preparations. You see, 90% of small businesses go out of business because they go bankrupt. And they go bankrupt because they don't set aside taxes. And they don't set aside other things that they need to prepare for at the end of the day. And so they never really know what it costs them to do business. I had a gentleman at church, a businessman, a contractor, who was helping me with some stuff about a month or so ago. And one of the things he said to me is, before I got this business manager, I was giving my work away because I wasn't charging people enough, because I didn't understand what my real costs were. And that's the way I think that it's not only true in the business life, it's true in your personal life as well. That you're only given so many hours of wakefulness and attentiveness in the day. It always helps to know what are your prime times of productivity so that you can do most important things during those times. But the thing is, you realize that you have to budget your day, your time. What am I going to spend my time on? When am I overextending myself? When am I underextending? I had a real problem as a pastor for years because I never turned down an invitation to speak. I never turned down a request for a counseling appointment. And I was working 70 hours, 80 hours a week, coming home exhausted, having nothing left for my wife and kids, and then getting up in the morning and throwing myself back at it. And eventually I hit a wall. And I hit that wall a couple times before I finally realized, because I would be completely mentally, emotionally, and physically depleted. And I thought that that's what I needed to do to glorify God and to serve His kingdom. And finally, I had a counselor sit me down and say, you need to figure out, why are you doing this? Why are you pushing yourself to these extremes? And I had to really kind of uncover a lot of things from my childhood that had been kind of ground into me by my workaholic parents, that I realized I was listening to a voice in my head that was driving me, but it wasn't the voice of God. And so when we talk about always being prepared, the idea is that we recognize that first and foremost, what are the priorities of my life? What are the most important things of my life? And what are the most important things in this day? And what is it I want to do? And if I haven't planned in for play and I haven't planned in for recreation and relaxation, then I'm going to find that I'm going to run out of energy because those things have to be part of our personal planning as well. So my advice to you is that you and your spouse, or whoever's somebody that's really close in your life, you sit down and you say, okay, what is the way that I can best organize my life? And I admit, interruptions will come and throw you off, but you can always get back to it. But the whole point is that you have some idea of what you're doing and where you're going and what your goals are. You see, I discovered this about the Apostle Paul in my study of the book of Acts. I realized that Paul had patterns that he followed. He did the same thing in every city that he went to in the same way. And that was a repeated pattern. He understood what his gifts were, what his responsibilities were, what his calling was, and how God best used him to bring that to pass. And that's something that many of us don't learn in life, or we learn too late to benefit from it. So my word of encouragement, start thinking about what is the plan of your life. Well, we'll continue tomorrow.